Are motorway services finished, past their best, destined for the scrap heap? Are EV hubs the future? GridServe and Applegreen seem to think differently, so who is right? I'm Dave. Welcome to Dave Takes It On. Well, going back in history, as petrol cars became more popular, the existing roads no longer coped, and as cars advanced and went faster, so they needed new roads. And the motorway was born. 1958, the Preston bypass was the first dedicated road to be classed as a motorway. Today, part of it is now the M6, the other part is the M55. Both are unrecognisable from the original bypass. With better cars and now better roads, we began to travel further and faster, and new motorways sprang up everywhere, the next being the M1. But the motorways had one essential missing. There was no stopping, so if you needed petrol, you had to pull off the motorway and go hunting for petrol stations, often in strange places. And almost immediately, the first motorway services were opened. That one is the one at Newport Pagnell, and that opened in 1960, just weeks ahead of Watford Gap. Well, the M6 near me got its first services at Charnock Richard in 1963, followed closely by a featured video of Lancaster services just afterwards. Well, with no advertising allowed, the architects used the design of the services as their advert, first by adding a pedestrian bridge over the motorway, and later Lancaster built their 65-metre tower. But immediately they hit problems. The tower was not used by anywhere near as many people as expected. It was a financial failure, and it finally closed in 1989. But on the M1, the opposite problem. They had expected 1 in 7 cars that passed would use the services, but it turned out that almost double that, 1 in 4 actually did, and expansion was required almost immediately. Well, motorway services were designed to be duplicated on both sides of the motorway, access from the motorway via a slip road, but with no vehicle access between them. Initially, they only had toilets and a petrol station, but quickly the shops moved in, then the restaurants and the food chains. Well, despite a few odd variations from this model, for example, Gordano services, the M5 and Swansea on the M4, it was not until 1992 that the law changed and the developers could decide where and how to build new services, not the government. The old model was abandoned. A new, more cost-effective, cheaper design took over. Motorway services off the motorway and accessible from nearby roads. Well, typically slip roads from both carriageways lead to a roundabout over the motorway, and the services are located adjacent to the motorway. And this meant that only one service building is required, cuts production costs, but also now the local population could visit there without having to get on and off the motorway. Well, this increased their appeal. And so the chains moved in, fast food, fast coffee and supermarkets. And these are typified by services like Rugby, Exeter and Cherwell Valley. Well, these were not strictly motorway services anymore, as they could be accessed without having to go on the motorway. And they changed the business model totally. With access only from the motorway, the site operator had a monopoly, and locally prices were raised. This was explained away as being necessary, as all the goods and food and staff needed to travel on the motorway, thus increasing their costs. But soon even these services had their own private roads added to allow staff and deliveries to be carried out directly. But the overpricing continued and exists to this very day. Typical motorway services today charges 20 to 30 pence per litre for your petrol extra, and chains like McDonald's and Burger King, Costa and Starbucks, they followed and also raised prices, partly because the site operators charged a premium for the site, but mainly because they could. Well, EVs and public chargers arrived very slowly and they headed straight for the motorway services. But one problem still existed, namely there were, and still are, large areas of the country without a motorway at all. Cornwall does not have even a single mile of motorway to this day, and others were really far away from one. So as EV chargers caught on, so they needed to locate chargers away from motorways in some areas. Small numbers were installed at supermarkets, shops, retail parks, but they could not keep up with the growing demands, so mini services opened up at key strategic locations, on the A30 at Bodmin, for example. When recent years EV chargers have not kept up and much larger installations were needed, featuring multiple chargers and motorway-like services, GridServe was one of the first pioneers with their hub at Braintree, not on a motorway, not really that close to one, but offering motorway-like numbers of chargers well in excess of 20. EV hubs now seem to be all the rage. They feature extensive services like coffee shops and fast food, and additional facilities like EV sales, test drives and on-site leasing specialists, plus office rental space by the hour. They became a central hub, not a motorway in sight. Well, Tesla also followed this model for different reasons. At first they found that Ecotricity had signed up all the motorway service to exclusive monopoly contracts, forcing them to install their superchargers just off the motorways, effectively offering hubs, but with services provided by the land provider, usually a hotel or a restaurant. Well, this changed when GridServe took over Ecotricity and eased those monopolies. In fact, GridServe and Tesla reached business arrangements to operate together, allowing the installations of much larger chargers with Tesla only and non-Tesla CCS2 chargers that would attract more passing traffic for both of them. And so today the situation is evolving. EVs can now travel well over 200 miles on a single charge. Most of them, I know some don't, but most of them. So they often no longer need to stop at a motorway services, which suited the drivers for two reasons. Well, first, motorway services were too expensive. They still are. Second, they're filled with lorries and cars, all producing huge quantities of exhaust fumes, making stopping there unpleasant, if not dangerous. One of the reasons for buying an EV was to get away from exhaust gases. Motorway services do not allow that. EV hubs out in the countryside offer exactly that. But while GridServe can pick and choose where it opens its hubs, EV charging networks like Applegreen, which now owns many motorway services, cannot choose. So a mini, sort of gentle battle is developing. Cornwall has no battle as they have no motorways, so hubs are springing up all over. Motorway service owners like Westmoreland hold the middle ground. They're installing on motorways, but they're banning the chains that dominate elsewhere in favour of strictly local produce, good healthy stuff, local businesses, locally grown, prepared and cooked foods and products. I wouldn't say this is a massive battle, as there's plenty of room for all to exist, but as the number of installed chargers grows, so the competition for the business will increase. And the number is growing exponentially with the help of government grants, tax breaks, and more recently massive investment from green renewable investors and investment banks. There's a finite limit to how much an EV driver will spend, and amazingly it's significantly less than a petrol car. You see, today over 80% of all EV drivers have access to home charging in one form or another, and over 80% of their EVs are charged at home on cheap off-peak tariffs offered by the utility companies who want people to use electricity overnight when it's nice and cheap and freely available. Well, latest figures from government sources ZapMap and GridServe indicate that while a petrol driver can only buy his or her fuel from a petrol station, spending over £1,300 a year, an EV driver chooses not to spend out on public charges and will spend less than £200 a year. Well, plus a petrol station requires an attendant to be present for those using the shop or paying by card or cash in person, as opposed to paying at the pump. While an EV charging station requires no personnel at all. Drivers serve themselves and always pay at the charger or on their smartphone or an app. Well, hubs will grow at a rapid pace, as will motorway services, but there's only so much charging taking place at public chargers, and despite an increase in the number of EVs on the road year after year, all the operators will find the numbers needing to charge begin to decrease long before they anticipate. Future EVs will drive further on a single charge, so stop less often. Most will charge mainly at home or increasingly at workplace or destination chargers, resulting in EV drivers spending less at public chargers per EV than at present. It's a complicated whirlwind of change and nobody knows the pace at which each of the factors will play out. As I stated in a recent video, the biggest battle will not be over location but over price. Tesla currently operates the largest network of ultra-rapid chargers. They're installing at a breakneck speed, they're opening more future chargers to non-Tesla owners and are nearly half the price of all the others at peak rates, averaging about 45 pence per kilowatt hour, and a little more than a third the price, about 30 pence a kilowatt hour, in many places off-peak. GridServe and Applegreen both charge 79p all year round, so the main battle will come when Tesla open up their larger installations like Rugby and Exeter, home to very large GridServe installations. Opening up to non-Tesla EV drivers for a small monthly charge, £10.99, they get access to half price or lower charging. Well, the situation is constantly evolving, so if you want to keep up to date, please subscribe and click the bell if you want to be notified when we release new videos. Well, thanks very much for watching. I'm Dave. Well, thanks very much for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, please click the like button. And if you would, please subscribe. It makes such a difference to us as a new channel. If you click the bell icon, the notification, you'll be notified the next time we launch a video. And a massive, massive, massive thank you, last but not least, to our Patreon members. This side of the business is growing dramatically. We've had our most successful month ever, and thank you so much for your support for the channel. I'm Dave.